Situations like this are becoming increasingly common along the U.S. Canadian border. Families like this one packing up everything and risking arrest, heading towards a new life in Canada. Taxi driver Chris Crowningshell says the family told him they were from Turkey, seeking asylum in Canada because of President Donald Trump.
Well, they say about Donald Trump, they don't know what to expect.
He makes the 30-mile trip from Plattsburgh multiple times every day.
I've been up here as far as 6 times.
The most popular destination, Roxham Road. It's a dead-end street that for many families is a pathway to a new life. Daniel Labarge has lived on the road for 2 years and says the taxicab drop-offs are now just a part of the landscape.
A lot of them are families with kids, just a wife and kids. They carry book bags, luggage, everything.
U.S. Customs and Border Protection regularly patrols this part of the border. The agency can stop anyone it suspects is illegal for questioning.
If they are here and they have legal status, then we basically cut them loose and they're free to continue on with their travels.
U.S. officials work closely with the RCMP, or Royal Canadian Mounted Police, to monitor those going back and forth. Because at the border like the one on Roxham Road, it's illegal for anyone to cross.
We arrest these people because we have to determine their identity, if their claim will be legitimate and all that.
Officials say if everything checks out, they could be released within a few hours. The RCMP says over the past few months, the number of people seeking asylum in Canada has risen dramatically since President Donald Trump announced his new immigration policies. The total claims nearly tripling within the past 3 years. For Crowningshell, it's business. More people who need his taxi. For one person, the drive from Plattsburgh to the border would be about $50, but it's a lot more for a family.
It depends on many people. 100, 200.
It's a price, he says, many are willing to pay for a shot at a new life up north. Day after day, week after week, the Canadian Border Services Agency, or CBSA, says it's seen a continuous flow of people trying to get into the country. Many choose to go illegally at unofficial crossings. It's a loophole in the system because they could face a problem if they take the legal route.
So this person arrives at the port of entry at the border office. The refugee claim may be ineligible.
That's because of the Safe Third Country Agreement between Canada and the United States. Under the agreement, people who are refugees in the United States can't just swap countries and become a refugee in Canada. So if they go to a port of entry like this one in Champlain, they could be turned away.
You will be arrested crossing here.
Here's where that loophole comes in. If a refugee is arrested for illegally crossing into Canada, they're processed differently. And Canadian Border spokesperson Jacqueline Roby says in that case, they could be allowed to stay.
We verify if the person has the right to access the refugee protection system in Canada.
Canadian Border Services says it's seen such an increase in refugee claims over the past year that it's created a temporary office at the St. Bernard de la Colle port of entry to process requests. It's where people arrested after crossing on Roxham Road are taken. Once asylum seekers arrive, they're photographed, interviewed, and fingerprinted to determine their identity and eligibility to seek refugee status. Roby says it's typically a quick process, just a few hours.
In most cases, people are eligible.
If everything checks out, the asylum seekers are released into the country to stay with family, friends, or at a government-run refugee center as they wait for their hearing with the Canadian Immigration and Refugee Board. But there are exceptions.
The Canada Border Services Agency does some removals.
For example, if someone's identity comes into question or if they pose a threat to the country, they're detained and in some cases deported. But with President Donald Trump's new immigration policy expected next week, Roby says her country will be ready and waiting for what could be an even greater increase in people who want to call Canada home. In Champlain, Liz Streppa, NBC5 News.
It is a topic we continue to track for you here on NBC5 News. Immigrants crossing into Canada illegally.
We've shown you the scene at the border at the dead-end road in Champlain, New York. But what happens after that scene?
NBC5's Liz Streppa Streppa went to Montreal to find out where they end up going and who takes care of them in a story new tonight.
This YMCA building behind me is often where many refugees who cross at places like Roxham Road and Champlain first come to stay. This is Mohammed. He's a refugee from Yemen who says he paid a smuggler $2,000 to get from Buffalo to Plattsburgh. Then he made the trip across the U.S. Canadian border illegally at Roxham Road in Champlain.
The guy who took me from Buffalo, he showed me where to walk. He told me, this is your road, just run.
And he did. Mohammed ran across the border to Canada in May of 2015 after war was declared in Yemen. He left his wife and 3 daughters behind with the hopes of reuniting after he had begun a new life in a safer country. For Mohammed, his destination was always Canada.
The most secure country, I think, in the meantime. And it's the most welcome country.
Over the past couple of months, Canadian officials say they've seen a spike in asylum claims like Mohammed's. Officials say they're able to help and keep track of the hundreds of people entering on a monthly basis because of a government-run program called PREDA.
We are in the business of supporting these people.
Francine Dupuis, one of the program's 20 staff members in Quebec, assists refugees with a variety of services as they wait for their asylum status hearings.
It's psychosocial, social, medical, health.
They also house refugees if they don't have anywhere to go when they get to Canada. PREDA has a partnership with the YMCA. Dupuis says most refugees stay here at these YMCA residences where they're fed 3 meals a day and get help finding a more permanent place to live.
It's a temporary situation.
We're told the living quarters are tight. No kitchens, just beds. PREDA says refugees are allowed to stay here until their legal hearing. That's when they find out if they got asylum, if they can stay. For most asylum seekers, the legal process is about a month or 2, but it could take longer.
Whatever their situation is, we do not have a judgmental position on that.
Dupuis says her office has been prepared to handle the recent uptick in numbers. Last year, it processed and assimilated thousands of Syrian refugees like Imbathal, who now calls Canada home.
We are used to managing ups and downs in terms of numbers.
Mohammed now works 2 jobs. He has health care coverage and his own apartment. He says it wouldn't have happened without PREDA's help.
They assisted me with everything.
The next step, he says, is getting his wife and daughters from the United Arab Emirates, where they're currently staying, to Canada.
It's the heaven of the earth.
That's how he feels about this place he now calls home. Again, this YMCA is really just a starting point. The government helping asylum seekers get on their feet as they begin their new lives in Canada. In Montreal, Canada, Liz Streppa, NBC5 News.
Well, Northern New York taxi owner accused of price gouging while helping refugees cross the Canadian border. The state attorney general says Christopher Crowning-Shield of Northern Taxi must now pay $2,500 in penalties. A court order also requires him to quote fares ahead of time. Authorities say Crowning-Shield charged fares up to $300 when the trip from Plattsburgh to the border should be $75 or less.
The influx of refugees into Canada shows no sign of slowing down. Hundreds of people, many of them Haitian, are crossing the border in northern New York every week. And that has forced places like Montreal to take action. They've opened up part of Olympic Stadium as a shelter. But what is prompting so many refugees to flee the U.S. in such numbers? NBC5's Liz Streppa talks with one woman about her dream for a better life.
I'm on the Canadian side of Roxham Road. We first took you to this area back in February because of the surge of refugees crossing the U.S. Canadian border illegally. Now, 6 months later, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police have set up these white tents. This is what greets refugees after they're arrested for crossing at an unofficial checkpoint.
It's a lot of traffic, a lot of people, a lot of cars, RCMP officers.
A lot of reasons for Maurice Dodar to want to leave her home of 15 years on Roxham Road.
It is an assault on our way of life here.
Over the past year, it's become a hot spot for illegal border crossings. The Canadian government says more than 3,000 Haitian refugees have crossed in the past few weeks alone. But despite the disruptions on her quiet road, Dodar insists on staying.
Being Haitian and having come here also as an illegal immigrant, my heart goes out to them, and it hurts. I see them go by on buses.
Those buses take them to their temporary homes. In months past, they went to either the YMCA or Olympic Center in Montreal. But because of the influx, there's been a shortage of beds at those places. So now they're taken here. This tent city is one of two just a stone's throw away from the U.S. Canadian border. It houses up to 500 refugees, and the Canadian Army says more tents are coming.
We're waiting to get the go-ahead to build a third site.
That third site will help provide shelter to about 1,200 refugees. The tents may not look like much, but the Canadian Army says they have wood floors, heat, and electricity.
Everybody has a cell phone these days, and everybody needs to charge it. So we make sure that they have the basic requirements of day-to-day life.
Their new everyday life will undoubtedly take some getting used to.
I would say welcome, and keep hope alive.
The Canadian Army says it will likely be setting up that third tent city over the next several days. It's just waiting to get approval from the Canadian government. Reporting in Quebec, Canada, I'm Liz Streppa, NBC5 News. I'm on Roxham Road in Champlain. This is where Canadian officials say about 250 people on average cross illegally into Canada each day. It's a record number that's putting stress on government services. Each day, hundreds of people make the same trek across country lines. For some, it's nerve-wracking.
Very scared.
Many asylum seekers like Duela DeRusso Calix travel hundreds of miles to get here. She came to Plattsburgh, New York from New Jersey.
I take the bus.
And then she took a taxi about 20 miles north to this dead-end street where she crossed the border. She's one of hundreds who are arrested, processed, and entered into the immigration system here every single day.
We've never seen such numbers coming in.
Officials from several Canadian entities ramping up their efforts to deal with the increase in asylum seekers crossing at Roxham Road. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police say in June, 800 people illegally crossed here. Now, so far in August, about 4,000 refugees have crossed in the same spot.
How unusual those numbers are, they're unprecedented. We've never seen those numbers.
The Canadian Army has set up tents to house refugees as they wait to get processed at the border. A typical stay, a few days. But going through the Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada or IRCC legal process takes months. The IRCC expanding its resources to deal with the rise in asylum claims.
We plan to add even more capacity by securing an additional facility for a new joint processing center in the near future.
If you cross here, you're entering illegally into Canada, right?
The Royal Canadian Mounted Police also ramping up patrols specifically at Roxham Road.
Not only police officers, we also deployed support staff, civilian members, public service employees to help us.
To help secure the border with the goal of protecting Canada's citizens and those who hope to call this country home. Again, the Canadian government stressing that getting arrested here at Roxham Road does not guarantee permanent status in Canada. If you're looking to seek asylum, you're encouraged to do so at legal ports of entry. In Champlain, Liz Streppa, NBC5 News.
Canadian government is on alert for a new surge of asylum seekers following a decision by President Trump. This was the scene this morning on Roxham Road in Champlain, New York. Patients using this dead end to walk across the border, only to be taken into custody by Canadian authorities. The Trump administration has ended a temporary residency permit program for nearly 60,000 Haitian citizens. They essentially have until July of 2019 to leave. Canadian officials say that while their country is open and welcoming, they're not giving a free ticket to anyone entering illegally.